All right, so let's circle back to the family stuff, because I remember you said the family stuff last time and the importance of a two-parent family. My parents are still married 40 some odd years. I just went back to my childhood home in New York, and for the first time I think I saw a little more tangibly what you were talking about. To go to my parents' house, to feel that it was the same place that I grew up in, the same community that I was part of. I visited family, friends, and some relatives that were nearby. And it did feel like it connected me to something that was important. It's sort of an ephemeral thing. It's something that's not quite tangible, but something that's important it lays your roots, so to speak, and that you can sort of figure out who you are from that. Is that really what you're talking about with the family? That it's not just that there's a breadwinner, but something else, something that's sort of bigger than that, that really can lay out what a life is supposed to be.
Absolutely. It's not just an additional check, as you pointed out. It's also being a role model, watching your father get up, go to work when he doesn't feel like it, watching him live up to his responsibilities. And, you know, the three arguably biggest leaders in this country, black leaders in this country, are Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and Louis Farrakhan. And all of them had difficult,
Man, that's a trio, huh?
All of them had difficult, if not non-existent relationships with their own fathers. Jesse Jackson's mother was a teenager who was impregnated by the married man who lived next door. And when Jesse Jackson was raised in South Carolina, kids taunted him. Jesse ain't got no daddy, Jesse ain't got no daddy, because that's how rare it was in those days to be raised without a father. Al Sharpton had a nice middle-class life until his father abandoned the family and then down to the ghetto. And in the case of Farrakhan, his mom was estranged from her husband, had a boyfriend, took back up with the husband, got pregnant, didn't want the boyfriend to know, and tried to abort Louis Farrakhan with a coat hanger. So all three of these men, in my opinion, have deep psychological issues because of a lack of relationship with their own fathers. And that is one of the reasons why, in my opinion, they're so angry, despite the fact that things have gotten so much better in terms of race relations in this country.
So basically, they can't let go of that pain. I mean, not to fully psychoanalyze them,
Right.
but they're dealing with a personal pain that is extremely painful, for sure, and they can't let go of that pain, so now they're kind of projecting it onto the rest of us via politics.
In my opinion, again,
Yeah.
I'm not a psychologist,
Right.
but if I were, that's what I would say. Now, a lot of people have had bad circumstances and have not been that sour because of it. My father, I think we talked about him before. My father does not know who his biological father is. The man named Elder was the man who was in his life the longest. He was an alcoholic who abused him and abused his mother physically. And my dad was literally thrown out of the house when he was 13 years old by his mother's then boyfriend, who sided with her boyfriend when he and my dad got into a quarrel when he was 13 years old. Came home from school, and he was making too much noise. The boyfriend got mad. My dad said something to him. His mother sided with the boyfriend. Out of the house he goes.
Wow.
13 years old, Jim Crow South, Athens, Georgia, right at the beginning of the Great Depression. My father was never angry, though. My father said to us, always, us meaning my two brothers and me, I picked up the cars, I dealt with them the best that I could.
What did he do? What did he do?
A series of whatever anybody would pay him to do. Cleaning this, cleaning that. Ultimately, he got a job with the Pullman Porters. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days. And he was able to travel around the country. That's how he ended up in California. He came here one time. It was sunny. People smiled. It seemed more friendly. And after the war was over, my dad relocated to California to try and get a job as a cook. And he was told that he had no references, which was California's way of saying we don't hire black people.
Right.
And my dad ended up being a janitor, worked 2 full-time jobs as a janitor, saved his nickels and dimes, started a little cafe near the Pico Union area, which he ran until his 80s.
Wow.
In fact, I wrote about this in my last book. It's called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, because my father and I did not get along. I thought of my father as grouchy and ornery, and I couldn't understand why he was so ill-tempered until I got 25 years old. We stopped talking to each other when I was 15. We didn't speak to each other for 10 years.
Wow.
And my dad and I sat down for what I thought would be a 10-minute conversation. It ended up being an 8-hour conversation. And that's why I wrote the book, Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, about this conversation.
Do you think that, despite what you've said about President Obama, do you think that now that he's out of office, maybe he could step into the role that you'd like to see him in? So instead of America turning to Jesse Jackson and Farrakhan and Sharpton, maybe they can turn to you, but if not to Larry Elder, that maybe Obama when you disconnect it from politics, can actually talk about some of those things. Because, I mean, you addressed it a second ago. You said he did mention the family and mention fathers and all that. Yeah. So is there a chance? Do you think there's a chance for that?
I'm not optimistic because in his last press conference, he talked about we still have a great deal to do on race. By the way, when people talk about a great deal to do on race, all they really mean is how black people feel about white people and vice versa. They don't care about Hispanics, they don't care about Asians, they really care about the relationship between blacks and whites. And Obama has, throughout his 8 years, in my opinion, when he could have ignored the race card or put it in perspective, picked it up. Whether it's Cambridge Police or whether it's Trayvon Martin, if I had a son he would look like Trayvon, or whether it's invoking Ferguson, whether it's hiring somebody like Eric Holder who's lecturing the country on race and racism. Obama, I think, believes that racism remains this huge, massive problem in America despite his election and despite his re-election. Yeah. And I don't. And so I don't think he's going to say the right thing and do the right thing. I think he's encouraged black people to think of themselves as victims, as opposed to saying, look at me, I busted my butt. My parents made sure I had a good education. I didn't make bad moral mistakes. I got married before I had kids. Follow my model and you'll be fine. He has not said that at all. What he said is, we have real problems in this country. He embraced the Black Lives Matter movement. I mentioned Trayvon Martin. I mentioned some of the other things. In my opinion, the reason that a lot of people voted for Obama was because they thought he was going to do exactly what you suggested, which is to heal us, put things in perspective. Tell young black people they ought not be angry when they're pulled over by a cop. All the cop is doing is his job. Instead, he did the opposite. So I'm not optimistic at all that he'll play that kind of role that you suggest.
Yeah, so the way we've demonized...
I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I hope you're wrong too. I don't know. But the way we've demonized cops as part of this, I agree. I mean, I see a lot of times people are just screaming about how evil cops are and they're hunting people down and all of this stuff. I don't know a ton of cops, but I knew some in New York and I know a couple here. I mean, generally they're trying to do good, right? I mean, do you have any experience in which, have you ever been pulled over and had a bad experience?
I probably have been pulled over maybe more than almost anybody you know. I got my driver's license when I was 15 and a half, my learner's permit, and then when I was 16 I was able to drive by myself, and I probably looked like I was 12. So I got pulled over probably 100 times. And with the exception of 1 or 2 instances, the encounter was brief and professional. One time a cop told me to take my head out of my ass. That was the first time I got pulled over, by the way. Yeah. I was driving and there was a light behind me and I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, so I just kept going. The guy pulled over and screamed at me and he goes, "Why didn't you pull over?" And I said what I said to you. "Well, officer, I didn't think I did anything wrong." And he said, "Whenever you see some lights behind you, you pull over, get your head out of your ass." And he was right. I should have had my head out of my ass. You know, the instances in which cops kill blacks has declined 75% in the last 45 years, according to the CDC, while the instances in which cops kill whites has pretty much flatlined. And so it's going down. It is very, very, very rare for the cops to kill anybody, let alone an unarmed black person. Of the 965 people that were killed by the police in 2015, less than 4% were white cops killing an unarmed black man. It is very rare. By contrast, 400 people were injured by lightning last year, but only 250 people were killed, black people were killed by police. So it's very, very rare.
So how much of this, I know you talk about fake news and I want to get to that, but how much of this is because the media is complicit in all this? So for example, just this morning, I think the Oscar nominations were put out. I haven't even seen them yet, but apparently there are more minorities this time. I guess there are some more Latinos and Dev Patel and some more black people. Right. And you know, for the last couple of years, there's been this Oscars so white thing. To me, and I can only speak for myself, this is like, your eye is just off the ball. You're just paying attention to the wrong thing, where it's nice to have people nominated for these things, but they're irrelevant in the scheme of what's important. And what you should be caring about is education and all that. Right. But the media has made such an importance out of this that it's like it's getting the black community's eye off what's actually important, which would be education and family and some of the other stuff.
I couldn't agree with you more. I have an actor friend and I said, "Why is this important to you?" And he said, "Because it provides role models and enhances the self-esteem of black people." That's what he said. Mm-hmm. I said, "Are you aware that black boys and black girls have higher self-esteem than white girls and white boys?" This has been tested for decades. It's been the case for a long time. And there are very, very few Asian actors and actresses, yet Asian Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, and Korean Americans on a per capita basis make more money than virtually anybody else in this country. So it's utterly irrelevant. Yeah. And for us to pay attention to this, and it's also not true. If you look at the last 15 years or so, roughly 10% or so of the nominees for the major categories have been black people. There have been a couple of years where there's been a shutout, but add it all up, it's about parity with population.
Right, so that's the irony. It's within a couple of percentage points,
Right.
it actually has been a parity.
And Jamie Foxx, who got an Oscar for Ray,
Right.
said in connection with this Oscar so white movement, he said, act better, be better, raise your game. Don't demand, don't yell, don't scream, get better, act better.
Yeah.
He got an Oscar. And I think part of the reason he said that is because it kind of demeans his Oscar.
Right, because then it means
you're complaining that Oscars are so white. How did I get one? I was lucky?
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe, I was excellent.
Yeah. So do you think that at times visibility is important? So for example, I've had Jack A. Harry on here. She was the first black woman. I think she won for Best Supporting Actress in 227, around, I guess it's around 1989 or so. At that time, do you think that a certain amount of visibility may have been more important than it is now? Like, because finally a black person did it. Even if you don't think that the thing in and of itself is important.
I don't think so. I remember some years ago there was an Olympic black skier named Debbie Thomas, I believe was her last name, and she was the first black Olympiad in ice skating, and she was constantly asked, "Who are your role models? Who are your role models? Who inspired you?" And finally, to me, out of exasperation, she said, "I don't need to see somebody black do something before I think I can do it." And that's how I feel. If I want to do something, what's holding me back from doing it, other than my own insecurities or inadequacies? Just get up, make it happen.
Yeah. How exhausting is this conversation to you? I don't mean this literal conversation right now, but just this thing, so much of what you talk about has to, unfortunately, be framed around something that you don't even think is real. You know what I mean? It's something that you think should be put behind us, that actually is behind us, and yet you have to talk about it a lot. Just on a personal note, how does that feel for you?
It doesn't bother me. I think there's a lot of feeling that race and racism remain major problems in America, and I think that you're approaching this with sincerity and real concern. I just don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah. By the way, I've emailed DeRay McKesson to have him on, who's the lead, I think the quasi-leader of Black Lives Matter. He hasn't responded, but I will ask him again. So I'm not just playing favorites here. I'm just putting that out there.
No problem. This is America. There are Cubans who are braving shark-infested waters to get here. There are people from Central America coming up here. Why do people come here? Why do so many people want to come to America? And it's because it is the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is a place where you can go from nothing to something faster than at any time and anywhere than in all of human history. That's why we're here. And to me, again, you are almost giving the forefinger to all the people who fought, struggled, worked hard, and died for people to sit around in 2017 and bitch, moan, and whine about race and racism.
Yeah, I suspect I know your answer to this, but what do you make of all these people that now want to look back on history and label everyone racist from back then? I was at Monticello, which was Thomas Jefferson's home. Yeah. Thomas Jefferson, who owned slaves, who was sleeping with at least one slave, I think several, by the way, at Monticello, I took the tour, this was only about a year and a half ago, they fully owned up to everything. They did not, I thought it was incredible what they did. Right. They said this man was writing the laws to free the slaves at the same time he was sleeping with the slaves, which I think you could probably make an argument was rape in a certain respect because they weren't equals, right? Now, I'm not saying he's a rapist in the conventional sense, but I can see that argument being made. But what about that concept that we're going to look back, that what I think the left is now trying to do is look at all of our founding fathers and take them out of give our 2017 morality to them who lived very complex lives. I mean, without Thomas Jefferson, the slaves do not get freed as quickly as they did.
Well, I think the idea of going back and airbrushing history and looking at history through the filter of today's morality is pretty silly. I think all a state can be is just in its own time, and that's what we're trying to be and trying to do right now. And people are right to call slavery America's original sin, but without a compromise, you wouldn't have had an America. And there was 750,000 people, both sides, who died in order to free the slaves. And people don't really have an understanding of the scale of the sacrifice that people made. 750,000 people at a time when this country was just 10% the size of what it is. So that's like 7.5 million people dying in order for there to be an outcome where slaves are freed. And those are the people that died, not the ones who've been injured. It was a horrific thing that America went through. And on the other side comes the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, the Civil Rights Movement, and all the things that have happened since then.
Yeah.
But this was a country that went to war over this proposition.
Yeah. What do you make of this intersectional thing that we have going on now? And I think we saw a lot of it at the Women's March this past weekend, where there's a certain amount of people that are trying to conflate trans issues with black issues, and then Muslim issues with women's issues, and just this whole thing where, you know, I talk about all the time, this oppression Olympics, and now they're all tied together by this oppression, but they all have to kind of beat each other in oppression to be the winner. This is a toxic mess, huh?
It is. It's what I call the victocrat culture, where everybody has a grievance and everybody's making a demand on the government to solve that grievance. When in fact we have far more in common than we have apart, and we ought to celebrate our similarities, and we're not doing that.